now we've reached the point where you need specific instructions for the preparation of your final review paper. We've been working up towards this as you've been gathering information, but now you need to be thinking about your first draft of your paper, which will be due on the 22nd, so it's a week on Wednesday. You have about 10 days to pull the first draft together. I've put up the instructions and the rubric for the final paper into a folder in the content section of Brightspace, so you can look at that information at any time. I will share with you the document that shows the instructions for the review paper. And the first part is just describing what I've already talked to you about previously, how it's going to be a paper summarizing research at a level that is understandable to your peers. You're writing for other students in the same stage in your discipline, but they should be understandable, at least at the introductory level, to all science majors. So you can't use extremely technical language, and because they obviously will not be understanding that. As it says, the tone of your review should be objective. This is a review, and it's not an argument paper, and you're not trying to argue a particular point out of many. You're just stating the state of the field at this particular time. So it's meant to explain the specialized area of scientific research to non-experts, but still your peers who are non-experts in this particular field. I mean, it's not an opinion piece. Okay, you are not expected or instructed to give an opinion about different, one thing being better than another. As you move forward into 498, then you will be expected to do that. Okay, so the format, and this is something you should know ahead of time, because then you know where you're aiming there. The first and second draft do not have to absolutely conform to format. However, if you're doing things in the correct format from the beginning, it means you don't have to do so much work later on fixing it. Okay, so what I am looking for is a paper that is 8 to 10 pages long, so minimum of 8 pages. Those pages do not include the title, abstract page, the figures, tables, and references. Okay, so it's a minimum of 8 pages of your text, your writing. Okay? So this makes it a fairly substantial paper. You can't pad it out with a whole bunch of the tables and figures would be copied from somebody else. That's not your work. I'm looking for 8 pages of your work. The paper must be 1.5 spaced, normal margins, Times New Roman, font size 12. Okay, I am not impressed by students trying to fudge the margins or bring down the top so it doesn't start till third the way down the page. All that sort of thing doesn't work. Okay, just be straightforward and honest. 8 pages, standard formatting. Okay. You're expected to use proper spelling, grammar, sentence structure, punctuation, etc. This is a formal, important paper. This is the whole course, and it needs to be done with precision and with pride. Okay, this is your paper. Furthermore, it should be formal. You don't use contractions, slang, or profanity. Not that I think there would be any cause to use profanity, but slang and contractions are the major thing that students want to use, and I do not allow. You will not see don't, couldn't, shan't, those kinds of words in a scientific publication. You will not use them in this paper. This is a formal paper. The format of the final paper with the title page, it should have the title, abstract, your name, and program. Don't worry about that kind of detail at this point. Writing a first draft is a first draft. It's just getting some meat down on the paper. So don't worry about being the pernickety of titles, abstracts, etc., should be written actually at the end once you know what content you have. Your paper may change slightly. The direction of it may change slightly as you develop it from first to second to final drafts, and so it's really not a good idea to be trying to write the title and the abstract before you started everything else. Okay, so and let's talk about the various stages of this. So your first draft ideally will be 4 to 5 pages. Okay, it will comprise most of your introduction. The introduction should be the easiest part to write. I mean, you're writing in more general terms about your topic, and so you should find it easier to sort of roll along and write about that. You can start a discussion on your primary papers. And it's useful to me if you list your references at the end, but I'm not requiring you to do your in-text citations for a first draft. First draft is basically put a whole lot of your ideas and stuff down on paper so that we can work with it. I'm not going to be fussing as much about fiddly details of the first draft. It's just going to be, what have you got? Is it organized in a reasonable fashion? What do we need? When we look at the first draft, it'll be, what else do you need? Is this the best organization for the paper? Looking how you build to the next stage. So it's getting content down. And I do encourage you, to, even if you feel like what you're writing isn't up to the standard that you would like in your first draft, it's better to get it down there, and then we can work with it. If it's just nothing, I can't help. Okay, so do put things down, and a first draft is graded as a first draft. It's not graded as a final paper. So I'm looking for the things that I've said here. Have you got a reasonable amount of content down? Have you got some introduction? Do you seem to be making progress? So the grade will be established on that. Second draft, so you will have another sort of week and a half to get from, once you get the first draft back, to develop it into a second draft. And of course, you should be continuing to read and write while I work on the first draft. You would hopefully expand it to 7 to 8 pages. You should have most of the content in your second draft. You should have added the figures and tables that you think you need, and you should start your in-text citations. One thing you must be aware of, that if you do a really good first draft, and you get 90% on your first draft because you've done well, that doesn't mean that you resubmit the same thing and you're going to get 90% on your second draft, because second draft is being graded as a second draft. And so it's quite possible to get a worse grade on your second draft than you did on your first, even though you've added, because you haven't added it at the same standard, right? So each draft is graded as that particular assignment and what's needed. Second draft, you want to have as much done as you can, because then I can respond to it. And going from the second draft to the final is really more of a just finishing up those final corrections and making sure all the references are right, and making sure the format of the text and the figures and tables, numbers, legends, all those kinds of things, are the references right? Making sure that all the I's are dotted, T's are crossed, that kind of thing. If your second draft is still very preliminary and you still got lots of content to add after I give back the second draft, you're not going to get any feedback on it, and you're inevitably not going to have such a polished final paper. So my advice constantly is try and get as much done in the first draft, and certainly as much done as you can in the second draft. So the final draft is really a question of polishing, and then at that point you will also be doing your oral presentation. So the end of you can take a lot of pressure off the end of the course by doing a good job the first and second drafts. It's obvious, but I just push that idea as much as possible, because you really can help yourself by getting good feedback early on. Okay, so if you have questions about that, you can obviously ask me. Now, the final thing I do want to look at with you is the rubric. You'll see what is going to be important in the grading. If I can get to file it in. Come on. Okay. Now, share. Okay, so this is the full paper rubric. So you will be being graded on whether the paper follows the correct guidelines and all of the sequence of ideas. Everything is in, as you have been instructed. Then knowledge of fundamental scientific principles. So this is basically content. Knowledge of the use of scientific reasoning and evidence. So here is your demonstration that you are reading these publications and pulling out the relevant evidence to support the claims. So those are all sort of standard science content. This next category, which only has 10 points, is identify scientific issues that are relevant to society. And I haven't talked about this before, but you do need to relate your topic to some degree with a broader audience. So if it's an environmental thing, you need to talk about why this is important for the environment, or a health thing, sort of give some indication of how many people would be impacted by the improvements. But just show the reader that you're not just operating in a scientific vacuum, that you have thought about why this is important to a broader audience. Then the remaining parts of the rubric are the referencing. So there's 30% on correct documentation, on writing and correct documentation. So the writing mechanics, so showing that the grammar, spelling, an order of ideas are all well presented. And then the documentation, accuracy and relevance. Are the citations correct? Are the in-text citations correct? Have you found good sources that really give good background information for the review paper that you're trying to present? You'll notice on this rubric that I've only got the 3 categories, and often students will get a 2 or a 4. It's just I haven't defined each of those. Obviously, they are between the levels of skill demonstrated, but that is the rubric that I'll be following. So you need to be looking at following the correct order, demonstrating your knowledge of the principles, demonstrating your understanding of how you use evidence to back up your ideas. Why are these ideas important in society? Correct writing and correct documentation. Okay, so those are your specific instructions for writing the paper. I've have been running these seminar classes for quite a few semesters now. This has been developed, and I'm fairly sure that this is quite doable, but it does require that you just keep working on this. You cannot afford to try and write it in one night. This does not work because inevitably will not have followed all of the instructions and will get a poor grade. So do these things, your drafts and everything on time, get the feedback, and then you'll get a good grade on your paper. Okay, I'm stopping that and say bye for now.